Okay, brilliant. So hello and welcome to this DMA Social Media Council Roundtable. Today is a social council first. In fact, this session is going to be recorded and shared with our wider social community, both in and out of the DMA. So today we're going to be talking all around social media silence as we sort of gallop towards maybe 1 year of perhaps one of the largest social boycotts of all time in response to BLM and the murder of George Floyd last summer. It was one of the largest civil rights movements of our lifetime, so it's no surprise that the expand into the digital, with many across the globe getting involved in the boycott from a social silence perspective on Blackout Tuesday. In the years since, obviously we've seen a lot of social boycotts, but we've also seen a lot of brands jumping on trends and kind of getting into social spaces across really big cultural moments. Sometimes they get that right, sometimes they get that wrong, and it's not always exclusively for political reasons. So off the back of some of the more recent ones, including the silence that we took to pay respect to the Duke of Edinburgh, and obviously the latest one over the last couple of weekends around the protesting racism within sport, there's a whole sort of spectrum in which we kind of choose to take a bit of a back seat. So we're going to be talking about why brands might do that, what is strategic silence, what roles brands can play in these types of conversations, and when to get involved. So to kind of kickstart that is our lovely team here. So I'm Liv, I'm the Social and Influence Director at TMW, and I'm joined by a host of people from the Social Media Council at the DMA. I'm going to try and Brady Bunch it a little bit. I'm going to go Elliot to introduce yourself now. Does that work?
I'm in the right spot. Hi guys, my name's Elliot Jones. I'm the head of digital at Daniel Dagger's Real Estate, one of London's leading super prime traditional estate agents. Now, if I can get this right, Sally, they're done there.
Classic. I did the mute classic Zoom move, but yeah, it didn't work for me, Elliot. But I guess it will vary and depending on who's recording. But I'm Sally. I work for an agency called Rise at 7, where I'm executive creative director, and we specialise in search-led creative.
Amazing. And then to the right of you, we have Daniel.
Gosh, this is fun to figure out, isn't it? Where the people are seeing. Yep, I'm Daniel Leck. I'm the head of digital at Growth Track, and I'm sitting in a lovely workspace. So I'm going to try and point without hitting anyone around me. Though I do have this 2-meter thing apparently. So I'm going to say somewhere that where is Verity.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Verity. I'm an associate at the law firm Osborne Clark, and we work with lots of technology and media clients, including in the advertising and marketing sector.
Amazing. And last but no means least, we have Chris right at the bottom of the screen for me.
Hiya. Yeah, my name is Chris Carley. I work as a senior marketing manager at The Guardian.
Amazing. So as discussed, we're going to be unpacking all of the stuff around the world of the social media silence, and hopefully off the back of it, we're going to have some really concrete recommendations and a bit of a point of view that the listener can take on to their next content planning session, whatever they've got planning across the next year. So to kind of kickstart that slightly, I've got a bit of a question to the group. How do you guys typically identify the moments in which you should think about taking yourself offline and being quiet? And sort of what sort of safeguarding measures does your organisation have within this space? So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts around that, or I've really kicked you in hard there.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off. Amazing. So the way that we run it, we very much go by gut feeling, right? We work with a range of clients. Thus our social following varies globally, demographically. There is no kind of one-size-fits-all approach to what people agree with and disagree with when it comes to those moments in time that might be, I don't know, different from the normal, I suppose, non-business as usual environment, the type of environment where we might expect brands to go silent in or not comment on or stop posting. So we very much go by our gut feeling. If it feels like we personally wouldn't be kind of open to seeing brands capitalize on a moment in time or an event or whatever. Let's use the death of Prince Philip. I think is a very timely one, given that it was so recent and kind of so public. For us, yeah, it was a big moment, and obviously we were we were devastated. It's a big moment in the history of the British Empire, but at the same time, a lot of our clients are from overseas. It wasn't necessarily as big of an impact to them, so we didn't decide to go silent on that day, and kind of carried on as business as usual. So it very much comes down to our kind of gut feeling. I don't know if anyone else has a kind of different take on that.
No, I think that's quite fair. I think what's interesting there is that you did continue posting, and did you see any backlash off the back of it? Did anyone notice, or do you think it's something that marketers get into their own head about a bit?
Yeah, no, we didn't see any backlash at all. In fact, I don't think anyone even spotted that anything out of the normal had happened. I do think often marketers can overthink these things a lot, especially in the fast-paced environment that is social. It's very much here today, gone the next minute. So you can dwell on a decision for too long, and overthink these things and get stuck in a rut of do I keep posting, don't I keep posting? And actually, the harm that it causes is negligible, given that tomorrow many things have been forgotten about. Yeah, completely.
I think that is a really interesting point. Sorry, Sally.
No, I was just going to interject. Sorry, I didn't want to cut anybody off. I think fundamentally, I guess we've kind of got 5 key principles that we'll always think through from a social perspective, as to whether we should post or equally whether we shouldn't. And I think a really good social media manager, they'll take a lot of flack, right? They get a lot of pressure internally. So having these things written down makes that process in terms of reviewing, is this the right opportunity for us to comment on, or an appropriate event for us to comment on? And having this stuff sort of written down, these kind of 5 golden rules, we've found really helps give sort of social media managers that kind of confidence to either challenge or push back. And they are, first and foremost, obviously knowing what your audience cares about. So generally speaking, a social media manager can always help represent their customer, their community, and they understand kind of what they're passionate about, and equally what they would expect us as a brand to have a point of view on. But within that, obviously need to make sure that that event or that opportunity, if that doesn't sound too callous, fits with the brand. So is it something that's going to kind of ladder to that kind of longer term ambition of the brand, certainly in social, and does it align to kind of what people know of you and would come to expect of you? There's some really good examples of that. I think, where brands like Innocent, I guess, are almost my favorite, where they've kind of turned it on its head with things like Penguin Awareness Day, right? And they have a bit of fun with that. So they've used kind of dates and all the ridiculous events and calendar dates that exist in the calendar to really own it. But would I expect them to talk about some of those kind of more serious issues that you mentioned, Liv? Possibly not, because it doesn't feel in keeping with their brand. The third one, I guess, is again something that social media managers obviously are kind of faced with on a daily basis, is there's so much space to add content and there's so much noise going on, is how and where can you add value? So have you got something kind of poignant to tell? Is the kind of audience gonna kind of get some benefit from the content that you put out in the world, particularly around a specific event or issue? And within that, I think the fourth thing would be how you make it unique. So is it something that any other competitor could do or say? If it is, how can you kind of put your own spin on it to make it feel kind of ownable and unique to you? And then the last one, also a toughie, if you're going to invest in jumping on that opportunity, creating content, creating a strategy around a particular event or an issue, what's it going to take you away from? Because generally speaking, you'll have to put, an investment of sorts into content or into kind of framing a piece of social content. What's that going to stop you doing elsewhere? And how can you kind of weigh up whether, I guess, the risk reward ratio is right in terms of kind of going after that opportunity? So those are the kind of 5 key rules, I suppose, that we use at Rise at 7 to help kind of review opportunities. And I think generally, as a kind of rule of thumb, they need to be obviously adapted to different brands and organizations, but they feel like a kind of good starting point, I think, in terms of knowing whether an event or as I said, an opportunity is kind of right to jump on as a piece of kind of trending news.
I think that's really interesting, and I do think that with that kind of note around safeguarding across to the rest of the group, it definitely feels like each company organization should have a level of that baked into what they're doing, especially if they're pushing out any sort of content around a sensitive period. I saw we don't have something as robust as 5 rules, but I mean, I'm definitely going to nick that because that was perfect. But we do have sort of daily social and editorial sessions where we identify what's going on, where do we need to shut the hell up and where do we need to kind of pipe up, and it's trying to have those opportunities to identify. Obviously, resource-wise, that's not going to be possible for every organization, but I think if you've got somebody within your company who is responsible for the social and content output, making sure that they're across that and have some principles in place to identify those opportunities is really integral.
But there can definitely be a lot of pressure, I think. We've all worked, I'm sure, in maybe more junior roles where you've had a directive from up above, we have to be posting on this. Why haven't we given an opinion on this? And I think giving confidence to, as I said, sort of social media managers or community managers, whatever they are, the confidence to be able to go back and go, well, how does this align to, as I said, our brand or our audience, and knowing when and how to push back, which can be quite difficult. There can be a lot of pressure around that. I'm sure you guys have experienced that. I certainly have.
Yeah, I think for us, it's really interesting because we're a news publisher. So we actually rely on the news, and quite a lot of the time it's the bad news that brings people to the site in the bigger numbers. And so as people who are, so like my team works within brand and reader revenue. So it's kind of our task to inform readers about ways they can support The Guardian and how they can subscribe to us for more up-to-date news. But we don't want to cheapen that message by jumping on certain news stories in a way that feels inauthentic or undermines the journalism. So we get sometimes pressure in the sense that like these are the times when we need to actually deliver the most subscriptions or like make an impact with revenue. But at the same time, we have to really respect the reason that people are coming to our site in those times, or to our social media channels in those times, because often it's because we're the trusted news source. So there's a real kind of balancing act. And I think one of the best ways that we've done that is by always taking our lead from the editorial teams and making sure that if there is a sensitive topic that our readers, editors, our community editors are the ones who are driving the copy and the way we communicate that.
I guess that's something that other brands should and could learn from, is that kind of approach and editorial standard. I guess we are all publishers and broadcasters, not quite to the level of The Guardian, but we are all doing that on behalf of a brand. So I think having that sort of standard there and that filter is something perhaps we could look to, the likes of The Guardian to learn from.
Yeah, completely agree. Does anybody else have any sort of other tips within that space around what to look out for and how to identify these moments?
I think one of the biggest challenges that a lot of social media managers will also face around those events is their competitors doing something, and actually being brave enough to go, just because every one of our competitors are getting involved doesn't mean that we have to, is a skill that social media managers, brand managers, digital managers need to learn, because it's very easy to follow the herd. Actually, it's far harder to go, do you know what, we're making a different stand to the rest of our peers and not getting involved and not commenting. It's definitely not an easy one, and not one that there is a right or wrong answer on, but it's something that as I say, digital managers should learn over time, or will learn over time, just by trying it. Doing
that pressure again, isn't it, Elliot? Almost like expectation. Everybody else has done it. almost like panic. I feel like I've got to put something out there in the world, but actually probably people don't care if you don't put something out in the world by and large.
Yeah, and sorry, as you were saying, Sally, there's so much content out there. So I think that sometimes if you don't have anything to say, rather than, you know, desperately trying to think of something, it can be better to take a step back and not say anything, because people can see through, you know, if you are just trying to jump on a bandwagon, especially, people will see that inauthenticity. So that's a kind of difficult balance and decision to make sometimes when there is that pressure.
Sure.
But to take that one step further, it's very interesting, and this is very medium centric in the fact that with any other form of kind of marketing or content-based marketing, the discussion wouldn't be when to be silent, because it's all about when you've got something to say, when you've got something to deliver, that's when you go out, that's when you show the world. With social media, because it is this continual discussion with a lot of kind of marketing managers and people kind of panicking about being ever present, we then have to flip the argument on its head and say, right, when shouldn't we say something?
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is, it's that thought process that then leads to people, as you said, jumping on the bandwagon, following what other people are doing. And often it can lead to problematic campaigns, backlash, and just basically delivering content that no one's really interested in, which can in turn, I suppose, decrease your kind of engagements and those kind of things.
I guess it can, you know, attract attention for the wrong reasons, like you said, because you get that bad PR that comes off there. God, well, that was incredibly like tokenistic or opportunistic, and you just jumped on the back of that, and actually it does a lot more damage to your brand as a result.
I think there's like this. Sorry, Elliot. I think there's so much to learn from how individual creators work on social media. So we're thinking about this in terms of how do brands react to sort of like big trends and like macro trends. But if you think about it, reaction videos or reaction tweet threads are like some of the most popular kinds of like formats of these platforms anyway. Like you have people like Graham Stephan, who's like a massive, you know, finance YouTuber, and he has his own channel, Graham Stephan Reacts, where he's just reacting to individual videos like all the time. I'm kind of like waiting for a brand to come along who just does reaction videos to other well-known people on YouTube. You know, maybe somebody puts out a really inspiring story and the brand reacts to that one person. Maybe it's you know, something to do with there's one video has gone really viral and a brand gives its take on that video or tries to do a different version of it. And, you know, in the way that things like TikTok duets have kind of created an entirely new niche, I wonder if the brands could actually get more of an impact by going into smaller moments like that, using their platform as a brand to maybe draw focus to like-minded smaller creators who are doing like great stuff that's going unnoticed.
So a flip on that then would be, have you noticed any of these reaction YouTubers not react to something that would be a prominent big story, you know, to go along with this kind of social media silence? And I say, well, actually, I'm not going to do a reaction video to that because it just wouldn't be inappropriate. Or does that not kind of exist for them and they're so totally different to kind of that brand ethic?
I think there's different genres of reaction video, right? Some people just like react to like I remember there was one where it was just like somebody reacting to German rap music, and like so it's like, and like someone was like, oh, like I didn't realize German rap was a thing or German hip hop was a thing, and then they just like watched a load of music videos and kind of gave their like American perspective on the German rap music and kind of made fun of it, even though I really like German rap. But like stuff like that, I think, whereas like, yeah, you might not need to react to something like Black Lives Matter if it doesn't feel like authentic or like in your, like it doesn't feel like you've got something genuine to add to that conversation. But I mean, you might just find a small niche where like you're reacting to people doing fun things on Fortnite or, you know, something like that does actually really resonate with your audience. Like, what are the videos that your audience are watching? How could you react to those videos, for example, in a way that you add another layer of like engagement to it? Like, I think that's the most important thing.
So is there another dynamic in this whereby we can say that we've got social media silence on one end of the scale, we've got normal social media activity somewhere at the start of the scale, but then we've got this element whereby something's happened, we know that potentially we can't react or we can't get involved in our usual discussion, but potentially going a little bit off point for brands could be a way to avoid the social media silence during that period of time, rather than going all out off or doing their normal thing. Is there kind of a middle ground as well that they could be involved in if they're potentially worried about not just a backlash, but a loss of, you know, reach or engagements during a time period of silence that might also cause them some sort of negativity.
Yeah, I think that putting it as a scale makes total sense, and I think that's the way that, as we sort of, I think across the last year, if anything it's taught us, is that we need to be readapting how we think about planning content, and that it's not so simple as, you know, newsjacking or whatever we used to call it in 2016, you know, that there are these sort of new boundaries that we need to establish. And I think that also, I think a point that all of you have sort of touched on in some way or the other with that is this idea of performativity in your silence or otherwise, and whether, you know, how much of what you're doing is coming from the personal belief of your brand or your organization, or it is very much a case of you want to be seen to be doing something. I think a prime example of how we've seen that in the last year was actually, whilst the boycotts that we experienced last summer were obviously for such a great cause, it didn't make a huge shift in the spend patterns there. In fact, if anything, I think we've discussed this before, that actually spend was up quarter to quarter on Facebook. So I think there's an interesting element within that around how much people wanted to be seen to be being quiet, but actually were probably creating a lot of additional noise, and when to draw the line on that as a brand as well.
Or whether it was just marketers like us that reflected on that, and actually the general, you know, Joe public saw that post, thought well of them for making that statement, but as you said, sort of carried on regardless. I wonder whether that is more of a marketing bubble, that we are more critical of that, and in this sort of tokenism.
I think that is the fine line that we always have to tread, for sure. Sorry, Dan, you were about to make a point.
I was going to say that's very interesting, because the one thing that we haven't really touched on is kind of from the agency's point of view. So, you know, we manage 100 social media accounts, and when there are people, I'll give you a case, an example. The pandemic hits, and all of a sudden sensitivity was right up there in terms of not pushing sales, not kind of driving people towards things when people were struggling to earn a living or losing their jobs or those kind of things. And you do try and become silent to a degree, so nothing's distasteful or nothing's kind of pushed where it shouldn't be. But at points where you're trying to convince a customer to be silent for any extended period of time, as an agency, you've got to convince that customer to go that way. And then how do you as an agency justify your worth for that period of time? Do you see what I mean? So there is that to balance. So from a marketer's point of view, it's not just the thought of, hey, what's the right thing to do on social here? But is there a case to say that a lot of agencies are like, well, we've got to do something because otherwise they're not going to pay their bill this month. And they're not going to put their ad spend in, and so our Facebook account's going to drop, and that kind of thing. And I wonder whether that has a play on kind of brands' perceptions of silence as well.
Wow.
Just a thought.
Yeah, I hope not. I hope that people would be able to have good enough relationships with clients to say, we might be quiet publicly on Facebook this week or this day, but we're going to reinvest that time into an investment in content. But maybe I'm just romanticizing things how I'd like them to be. I don't know.
Yeah, I think in my experience, I think I advised a lot of people, and I think we all adhered to it for a bit, but after time that investment did reinvest in other places, but it was still content, and it was still producing stuff to talk about, probably outside of the window of silence. Can
anybody remember, Liv, I think you mentioned again at the start of the call, off the back of the George Floyd kind of protests, and a lot of brands publicly being in support of Black Lives Matter, was there any brands that got called out for not supporting it publicly or not making a statement? Because I feel like there probably was, but I'm just interested to know whether our silence can then have a kind of public consequence in terms of not being vocal and not having an opinion, not just that internal discussion that we had, but actually it being publicly held up. Can anybody remember any examples?
I think that definitely was, because I do remember it obviously being a real time where the sort of industry sort of transcended its own bubble almost, because everybody was talking about it and people were much more aware. But even now, thinking back to it, I'm pretty certain I read about it in Ad Week or Campaign, even if there was that backlash. So again, it did feel quite internal. But I can't remember any brands by name who specifically did. I can remember those who said that they were going to stop. I know that Unilever said that's it, we're pausing it all. But I can't remember specifically brands who continued in spite of it.
I think it's easier to remember times when brands they seem to get called out more when it's disingenuous, or there's no authenticity behind the message that they're trying to give, that they are so blatantly jumping on a bandwagon when they shouldn't be there. And I think that's probably the balance with this whole point. It's like, when is it right to be silent? And when should you come out in some sort of support? And I think what has been a common thread again of this discussion with the authenticity and that brand message is that it's quite obvious to see when someone who has never spoken about anything before ever has just jumped on it to say, hey, we're in support of this, and I think that's when there becomes kind of more backlash. I think the other issue with social media is it's much easier to get, not necessarily offend people that aren't your typical audience. Your audience are already quite loyal, but it's not your audience, and they're the people that seem to have the biggest voice, and you can get lost within this kind of battle where you're battling 3 or 4 people as opposed to your a full customer base. It's the small minority that come out and get heard, but when it gets picked up upon and starts to snowball, that's when you start to get in trouble.
And it can stoke that fire, right? The more you start to get involved in a public discussion, in a debate, again, I'm sure we've all seen those examples when you're like, actually, you're probably best not to get involved, not to comment, because you'll make it worse and more people will see it and it'll become more and more visible and more of a thing.
Yeah, or they just get it wrong.
Right?
Or just get it wrong.
The thing with stuff like Black Lives Matter is that, like, it's not just a social media issue. Like, it's like a structural issue in like all of society. And so if your company isn't responding to that as a whole and saying, we acknowledge like the role that we've played in furthering these structural inequalities, whether that was conscious or not, you can't just as a marketing team go off on your own and try to write up an anti-racism comms strategy, because people see through that. Like, it's not a marketing issue. It is a marketing issue in the sense it's an issue in every aspect of life, but for companies, it needs to start with, as a company, what are we doing to be anti-racist?
Yeah.
And then it needs to be led by probably like the comms team, who really get the read of what is coming from the sort of executive committee and the board. And then
not just talking about it on a week or a month when it's like trendy to do so, but like it being ingrained, right? Like you said, Chris, not only in what you're doing as a business, but the frequency that you're talking about it and the transparency, I think, that you have when you're talking about initiatives or programs or a point of view, a commitment from a company, and that being like not just a tokenistic day or week when it happens to be like a trending topic, because let's be honest, that just feels uncomfortable, I think, doesn't it, to most of us.
I think that's also a really interesting point, Chris, because for one of my clients, to your very point, they were like, whoa, we're not just putting out the performative black square, we want to go away, think about what we're going to say, prepare a proper strategy here, let's go do this. And I was going, I get that, but you also maybe have to balance the timeliness with it as well, because people are going to probably start to ask questions. People were asking questions of brands, and in them doing the right thing about taking the time to actually properly address how they were going to do it in that brief period, admittedly they could turn it around fairly quickly, but we did have a lot of people coming to the page and saying, hey, we're like, why don't you have a point of view on X? It's disappointing you haven't said anything. It's hard then as the social media manager, a great guy in my team, to be like, I completely agree, and we do have a point of view that we want to share here, but it's not ready yet. So it's like that's when the social media manager kind of, it all lands on them a bit, and it's a bit unfortunate. So getting that timing right is definitely something about not rushing it, but making sure that you're saying the right thing, and it's something that you can actually adhere to, and that you're not just jumping on it. It's something that you're actively trying as an organization to push forward for.
And the flip side is what the bad publicity gets you as well.
Yeah.
So it's also thinking about I remember, I think it was it Burger King on National Women's Day or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
And okay, it's potentially not as serious as Black Lives Matter, but it's still quite a kind of social complexity and gender equality and stuff like that. I think, I can't even remember what it was, but something like our women belong in the kitchen. Yeah, something like that. Trying to promote the fact that they're hiring women on equal pay or that kind of thing, but it completely backfired for them. They got a load of backlash, but actually the backlash then turned into this kind of funny viral thing that then probably generated them more publicity than they could have done by supporting the message in the first place. So there is always that kind of undertone of, you know, if we get it wrong to a lesser degree, it's still going to be right, if that makes sense. And I think a lot of people have that in their mind.
Comes down to the brand, right, and how you want that brand to be perceived. So I guess being a bit ballsy, bold, you know, Burger King are being a little bit more antagonistic. Is it something I'd want to recommend? Probably not. But like you said, Dan, I can see, like, it got eyeballs, right? It got us all talking about it. And I can't believe what they've done. They probably knew what they were doing, right? I don't know. I'm still on the fence with that in terms of
I would think
how
so,
considered that was as a strategy and as a choice.
Ballsy, very ballsy. It hasn't paid off, I don't know, but I mean, it was a bit, I felt a bit tense for their social department because it went so badly wrong. I was like, Christ, I wouldn't want to be the social media manager on that. Okay, well, I think that also kind of, we've spoken a lot about, you know, when to be quiet, when to jump on things, when not to. And I think something that I would love to just touch on as we sort of close out is well, when to, you've done the thing, you shut up, you've let it all sit for a bit. When do you go back? When do you return to posting? Because obviously that's something we discussed as a team around the death of Prince Philip, being like, obviously we're very sad about it, but like, when can we recommend to our clients that they can actually get back online, and taking a call on that? I wondered if anyone had any advice or thoughts around that we could discuss. Or maybe not.
I was going to say one thing. So one thing to think about here, because I think there were a couple of studies done, and I can't remember, I think it were university studies, and it was around social media silence and what you, forgetting about kind of the gains of the respect of your followers and people kind of admiring the fact that you're paying your respects and doing all those kind of things. But whilst you have a period of silence in social, obviously you start to lose your traffic and those kind of things. And a lot of people measuring them in terms of kind of direct engagements, i.e. kind of interactions with an audience or with your existing audience, people that support you, and then kind of your impressions, your reach outside of that. And the longer you stay silent, they both drop. And actually the interesting thing around this is that when you come back, the engagements come back a lot quicker with your audience, with the people that are listening to you, talking to you, want to know what you've got to say, than those impressions do. Is the impressions that then take their time, and the reach that takes the time to come back, because that's when you need to have volume, frequency, content, and those kind of things. So I think the strategy that you go for as a brand, or how your social runs for you, whether your social is a lot more about kind of reach and branding than direct engagements, might depict on how long you can stay silent for. Obviously, you have to take into consideration the seriousness or the ethical of the situation as to why I went silent in the first place. But I think that if you are a company that requires that reach and needs to be in front of people, you're going to want to get back really, really quickly to get those impressions back. Whereas if you have a loyal base, they'll still stay loyal because they're silent too. They're going, and normally it's the rapport that gets people loyal. It's the fact that they buy into the same stuff that you buy into, and vice versa. So they're probably understanding why you're silent. They know they don't need an explanation as to why you're silent at the moment. So they're just waiting for you to come back. And I think depending on what your strategy is and how you come across as a company, that makes a massive difference as to what you're aiming for, as to how quickly you'd come back. If that answers it slightly.
I think it does. I think that's great.
I think there's also a question about almost like reading the room, isn't there? You know, having that kind of confidence and the clear strategy, the understanding of audience and how your brand fits with those different communities, and the channel strategy and all the stuff that I guess we do day in, day out for our work with clients or in-house, it's having the confidence in that and understanding what people come to you for, what your role is in their lives, your kind of content pillars, so what you're there to deliver, because it puts a lot of pressure, I suppose. Liv, that's what I took from your kind of question, like that first tweet back after a week's silence. What should that tweet be? How significant is that tweet? Mm-hmm. So I can imagine that did put a lot of pressure on kind of brands who had stayed silent for the week, for example, following the official mourning for the Duke of Edinburgh. What do you come back in? Actually, it's about understanding the mood of the nation a little bit and understanding, has the media narrative changed? What's the social media conversation like? What role could social data play in terms of impacting our content? Well, actually, from memory, people were just desperate for some form of positivity that week, right? Lockdown still felt really heavy. I think the weather had been a bit naff. Alongside that kind of very kind of public period of mourning, understandably, I think people wanted some respite. They wanted something to look forward to, and they were looking for examples of positivity and how brands could kind of play that part in their lives. So I'm not sure that's an answer, but I think there's certainly a question and a discussion to be had around the role that you kind of serve, but how well you can read the room and show that you're reacting and responsive to that.
Yeah, and also you can, like, so much of it is to do with like reliability and how connected you are to your audience, right? Like there's like, you could just put out a tweet at the start of the boycott or the news wave or whatever and say, we're going to take some time out from promoting our products or whatever, so we'll be back in a week's time. Come back in a week's time when we'll be resume posting again. Or you could even ask your audience, when we're going to give you some space to go through this as a community, when do you think that you want to hear from us again? And then maybe you might get a response from your audience saying, actually, we want you to be with us for this whole journey. We don't want you to stop. Or you might get people saying, in a week's time, hey, we want to hear how you're getting on. So just treat it like you would any other relationship, and give people like clarity on where your head's at and when you think that you feel able to return.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great shout, Chris. And kind of we talk a lot about crowdsourcing content and speaking to our community about what they want, and obviously there's a whole host of positive things that you can take from that, but actually maybe this is where we kind of turn to them on the slightly more serious stuff as well, and understand what they need from us and their community, which I guess sort of rounds us out a bit about the sort of the whole spectrum of when to identify, what kind of things you are going to say, and then also how do you actually resume into that posting. As we kind of move through that, does anyone have any other advice or sort of ideas or sound bites, as it were, around what to do within this space for our listeners? Someone must have a spicy hot take that they've got written down that they could just desperate to get out. Or not.
Yeah, I'm happy to go. I think for me, the litmus test in all of this is, am I willing and prepared to have a debate about this? If it happens, if we either stop posting or post when perhaps we shouldn't, am I willing to have a debate on the reasons why I've made the decision that I've made? If I am and I'm prepped, then it's the right decision for us and for the brand. If I'm not, then maybe we question why we've made that decision. Mm-hmm. Because that's what's going to challenge social media and brand managers the most, when they're ill-equipped to have a debate on a decision that they've made in a public forum.
Completely.
I also think a debate internally as well, right? Is like as Sally was saying before, you need to be able to, you need to prepare for these things in advance. Like you need to actually have an anti-racism policy as a company so that you can then speak about it when the time is right. And you need to actually have a two-way relationship with your stakeholders so that they understand when it isn't and isn't appropriate to engage with a certain topic.
And I think following on from that, one of the main things that has come out of this is the importance of consistency. And in order to be consistent, you need to know what your brand is and what it represents and who your audience is. And then that can help inform your decisions, because ultimately a lot of this is a judgment call. And so if you have that kind of knowledge behind you, you can make that judgment call. Whereas doing it on the fly is always kind of a much riskier strategy.
Absolutely. And social media managers are often, at the coal face of making those judgment calls, aren't they, Verity? So that's why social media managers are so important, or community managers, because they do make those kind of very public decisions. So I guess that's probably quite a nice, neat conclusion, Liv, is just how important social media is and social media managers.
Yeah, big up social media managers. The world could not survive without them.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, but they couldn't. Yeah, that's a brilliant way, I think, to sort of close it out, really. I think it's been a great first discussion, first of many, I hope. Does anyone have anything else that they'd like to throw into the pot, or are we all done?
I think we're all done.
Thanks
for hosting, Liv.
No worries. Thanks so much, guys. Thanks for coming along.
Thanks, Brady Bunch.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thanks, bye, everyone.
And our weird appendages.